in my time, I went to Douglas High School on Price Road, which is closed now. And you would go there from the rural areas in the 7th grade. And I was making pretty good grades and all that. And by the 9th grade, you had to take VOAG. And of course, as kids, we didn't know why, but we went ahead and took VOAG. There was a section of blacks living in the area, I'd say about a square mile, not a square mile, maybe half a square mile, who were not in the city limits, so they came to that school too. The rest of us came in buses from all over the county. And about the 9th grade, about spring of the 9th grade, we had been in VOAG since September of the previous year. And Mr. Mack, the VOAG teacher, asked us in general, he didn't ask me specifically, if we wanted to go to Frankfurt to the NFA convention. And it would last, I think, 3 or 4 days. So I said, well, yeah, let's go, to myself. But it took me a couple of days to decide to go. I don't know why. And we went to Kentucky State at Frankfurt. We stayed about 3-4 nights, probably 3 nights and 4 days. I always look forward to playing softball. But at the same time, we had our regular sessions, and then it came time for nominations for offices for the next year. And somebody nominated me for president. Well, I hadn't even thought about whether I wanted to be president or not. And I've forgotten the details, but there were probably others nominated. And we went down through I think we started, I forgot whether we started with president first. I think we did. It went down through the offices. Well, as president, I was supposed to go there and to represent them at the National Convention. This was 1946, just about a year after the war was over. And I imagine it took a little time for the college to get ready for us. Instead of having the convention in August, they had it in October. And I remember Mr. Manley and a fellow named Mr. Story. He drove a relatively new 1940s, it was not new. It was a 41 Ford before Ford quit working, before President Roosevelt got him to quit making cars and make tanks. But it hadn't been used that much. It looked pretty good. So we drove down to Southern University in Baton Rouge. And there was a convention there. And all at once, I was nominated for national secretary. Again, I wasn't particular. I was just enjoying the convention. And so I became national secretary. So that involved then going to leadership training. So the spring of somewhere around February, maybe early March, we went to Tuskegee for leadership training. And that was the first time I had seen Booker T. Washington's statue there, where he is shown lifting the veil of ignorance from his people. I was mesmerized by that.
Right.
And we had a convention, not a convention, leadership training. And then the following summer, we had the convention in August at North Carolina A&T State University. But in between that and that convention, the national officers were supposed to visit state conventions. So I visited two. I visited Virginia State Convention that I think that's late May or early June or somewhere in that time. And then I went on to the Maryland State Convention, which was held at Princess Anne College on the Eastern Shore. And I had to cross, the way they set me up to travel, I had to cross from Norfolk, Virginia, I believe, to the peninsula where Eastern Shore is. But the bottom of the peninsula, look at the map, it's still Virginia. But that was the first time I had ever been on a ferry and had seen that much water. And so we crossed the mouth of Chesapeake Bay, and I've forgotten the details at this time, but I probably caught a bus on up to the Maryland part of the peninsula and to Princess Anne College. And I remember it was so small. It had, I don't know what the exact time was, but it had been turned over to the state from the Methodist Church. It used to be a Methodist college. So, but it had become the Black Land-Grant College. Now later, it became the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. So, and I've been there several times in later my career. Well, this was 1946, 47. 47, spring of 48, I presided at, let's see now, spring of 47, I presided at Kentucky State meeting. That's spring of 46, I was elected as secretary, but it still went back to spring of 48. Spring of 49, I was not a national officer anymore, but I was nominated to represent them again at the convention. Was this 48 or 46? Yeah. Anyway, I'm getting my times mixed up, but I represented them at the next convention, which was at Tuskegee in 48. Yeah, that's right. Spring of 48, May of 48, Tuskegee had us in August, that's right. And I was nominated for the national president. And the same kind of thing, but by that time I was enjoying myself. By that time I began to kind of understand what it was. It was leadership training, primarily, leadership training. We went through all kinds of things. The next leadership conference was held in Washington, D.C. And to this day, I've forgotten where we stayed. We probably stayed with private people, because in those days we couldn't go to the hotels. I have some pictures, I should have brought them. I have some pictures that my brother found in my mother's papers of us in, there were 7 of us, I believe, in Washington, D.C., and there's a picture of us with the Capitol in the background. So that was the leadership training conference of 48. I went to the state convention again in May, and the colleges, and of course I never understood this, nobody came to us officers and said anything about structure and problems and all that. So apparently they couldn't get anyone to host the convention. Now the 3 schools that had hosted it were Southern University, which is fairly large, Tuskegee, and North Carolina A&T. Those are fairly large schools.
Right.
So they decided to have it at the Auburn Avenue YMCA in Atlanta in the summer of '49. And again, it must have taken a little time to get straight because we had the convention in October. But at that point, this was 1949, I'd already entered college for Florida A&M, so it was closer going from Florida A&M to Atlanta than coming from Kentucky to Atlanta. That was a nice convention. We knew it was his start. '49, Martin Luther King hadn't come of his own yet. Martin Luther King, I'm inserting that because Auburn Avenue YMCA was real famous in the black community. And Martin Luther King grew up on Auburn Avenue, a few blocks away.
What kind of attendance did you have like at that convention, approximately? You remember?
See, you're asking me things that I just don't know. But I would say, let me go back to the state convention that I attended. I thought the state convention at North Carolina A&T was the biggest. Now, I don't know how many were there, but I would suspect there were about 250 there.
Okay.
The state convention at Maryland was probably the smallest. I left it out, but I also went to the state convention at Lincoln, Missouri in St. Louis. That was probably, I would say, 100, 150. See who else was Lincoln, North Carolina A&T. Virginia State was probably about the same size as Lincoln, somewhere in there. I traveled to the Southern Convention, the first one, 1946, with him. Mr. Story from Lincoln Institute drove the car. Mr. Manley and I rode, and I believe there was another fellow. Yeah, we picked up another fellow in Guthrie, Kentucky.
The Lincoln Institute was in Shelby County, right?
That's right. And by the way, my mother and father worked there back in the 20s.
Tell us a little bit of what you did with your life outside the NFA after you were older.
Oh, I finished college at Florida A&M. I made the fraternity. We didn't have Farmhouse and Alpha Zeta and those. But I graduated with honors. I graduated with about a 3.45 average. And I wrote letters to go to graduate school. I decided I wanted to go. I'm the kind of guy I decided to do whatever the next step is. Most of my colleagues would, regardless of what they would major in, they would take the education courses so they could teach WAG, get a job right away. I wrote letters to several colleges that I knew the faculty had degrees from, and I didn't get anywhere. They said, well, you can come here, but we don't have any money for you. But in analyzing that over the years, I think what happened, I don't think the faculty members knew that you had to get accepted in the fall. I didn't start writing letters till February. So, but I didn't think about that for a long time until I got my kids, until they had to help my kids go to college. And I graduated from there. I came home. I didn't have a job, and I'm not sure I wanted one. And I talked to several people, and I had a first cousin who finished ag at Kentucky State. And he said, the University of Kentucky has ag. I said, what? Next day, I was right out there. And I went to the dairy building, dairy animal science building, which they raised for the medical school later on. And I saw, saw a fellow named Dr. Speth. He assigned me to a fellow named Dr. Morrison. And I supposedly was in microbiology, of which I wasn't too interested, by the way. I think what happened, they wanted to fire up Dr. Morrison. Dr. Morrison had just lost his incentive to do research. And, but I finished my coursework in a year. I did some research. A fellow named Dr. E.N. Boyd, who was in charge of the dairy itself, market milk, ice cream, cheese, and all that. And he gave me a project to work on because I had no idea about what research was. I just knew I wanted to do it. And so I finished that and went back to work at Florida A&M. Hadn't gotten my degree yet. Dr. Walker, who was dean down there of Ag and Home Ec, who had been my dean as a student, he hired me. And he told me about mid-year that Mr. Saylor was coming back and he couldn't afford to keep me. Mr. Saylor had gone to graduate school. And he couldn't afford, he didn't have a slot for me. So he said, why don't you go to graduate school? I said, well, you know, Doc, I wrote all those letters and I didn't get anything. He said, well, there's a sign up on the wall here, and Washington State is advertising for graduate students. And by that time I was married my wife during the Christmas. In those days you had to have a job to get married, you know. And so I wasn't too interested really. Not that I didn't want to go to graduate school, I guess I didn't want another rejection. And I told Dr. Walker I'd just rather go ahead and do my military obligation and then do something. Well, I talked to my wife, and she said, well, why don't you write the letter? So I wrote a letter to the chairman of the Department of Dairy Science. And 3 weeks later, I got a telegram saying we'll give you $1,400 for 9 months and $600 for the summer, and if you'll come. But you got to finish your master's at the university. So we left early, went back home. My dad got a place for us to live. And I wrote the thesis, spent the summer writing the thesis. Dr. Ted Freeman, I don't know if you knew him.
I do.
Dr.
He's a good dairyman.
Dr. Morrison had left to go to Brazil on a mission, on an agricultural mission. I've forgotten the guy whose father worked at Iowa State, but I can't think of his name, and then Dr. Neil Boyd were on my committee. And passed my oral exam. Then I had already joined the reserve. Then I went down to Fort Benning for 2 weeks of summer camp. Came back home. My wife's grandmother gave us $125. My dad gave us $125. In the meantime, I had bought a car. I don't know what you want to know here, but I'm just telling it like it comes to me. And I didn't know that before. They had a no down payment. So I went to them, bought me a stripped down Dodge, 53 Dodge, 2 years old at the time. And what happened was the one loan company would lend you the down payment, and then the other loan company would finance it. And I was, out of my $141 per month, I was paying $75 on that car. But it got us out there. I taught my wife to drive, and she became a good driver. We got there about, if I remember, about the 11th of September. And got enrolled, and spent 4 years at Washington State. They gave me some breaks. I wanted to take chemistry as my supporting rather than microbiology. I thought the Latin and microbiology didn't look too hot to me. I guess I could have mastered it, but it looked a little dull. So I went into chemistry, and I didn't have the mathematical background for chemistry. So they let me take non-graduate courses to get my, my record up to the
Get caught up.
Right, and so I had algebra, but they said they didn't know whether or not it was really the thing I should have. So they put me in intermediate algebra. I found out that the difference in the algebra I had and what they had was factoring. I had never had factoring. I didn't even know factoring existed, but I learned it, and hey, I was humming in the sense that I was enjoying it. I was enjoying my courses, and I took statistics the first year. I made A in statistics both times. I went on up in the math side. I went on up to trigonometry, and then 2 full semesters of 5-hour apiece calculus and analytic geometry and calculus. And on one of those courses, a fellow said, I asked the guy, how could I make an A? He said, if you make 90 on the final, I give you an A. Well, I don't know if he did it on purpose. I don't think he did. I've always been one not to question. I made 89, but I didn't get the A. So anyway, I spent 4 years there. Our first son was born after 2 years in 1957, and my wife worked at several jobs to help us through. I got $90 a month from the, not a month, $90 every 3 months from the reserve, from being a reservist. And I took my final orders on my 27th birthday. And of course they kind of question you like, Brad, I didn't do, it wasn't a great thing. I didn't do a great thing on the orals, but I passed them. And my first job was at Tennessee State, which is a sister institution to Kentucky State and Florida A&M and Virginia State and others I've named. And I worked there 5 years. They had a dairy plant that they needed activated, and I got it going with one of these, I can't think of the name no more, but they had one of these outfits that you had to have fuel, and you started it, but it was so complex. It worked, but I was afraid that at some point it was going to do some things that I couldn't handle. And I'm sure if I could name that gadget, you'd know what it is. In the meantime, we had ammonia system for refrigeration. It broke down about every 2 months, that kind of thing. So at the end of the first year, I told the dean, I said, look, I'm not going to deal with that until it's taken care of. So I started writing. I started writing papers for the faculty journal. I happened to they could not keep a biochemist. They hired one biochemist, and she got angry because the men were making more than she was, and she was right. And so she went out to UC Davis as a postdoc. In the meantime, I took over. They were teaching biochemistry in animal science. So I took over that for the next year or so. And then they got another biochemist who got his degree from from Iowa State University. And, but I stuck with it. We decided you teach the biochemistry courses for the majors, and I'll teach biochemistry for the non-majors. So we set it up like that. In the meantime, he goes to Howard after about a year and a half. But during that time, Iowa State was advertising for a postdoc in dairy. I said, I jumped on it. I wrote the letter. This must have been somewhere around 63, mid-63. I wrote the letter. The guy said, come on, can you come in September? I said, yeah. Well, then he wrote back and said, well, the guy I got's decided to stay on one more year. So I went in the fall of 64. I stayed there 5 years. And I went there as a postdoc research associate. They promoted me to assistant professor. And then by that time, we had what, 2 more children. We had 2 more children in Nashville, Tennessee State. And we adopted a girl, because all of our kids were boys. We moved to, at 5 years, I got the call. Martin Luther King was killed. At least the president of Florida A&M got deposed. Farmer Dean, a man who I'd worked for 1 year, became president. He won all new deans. They sent me a letter, the Vice President Rainey, who became, by the way, who came to Florida A&M as a freshman. He was a biologist, but he had become Vice President for Academic Affairs. He wrote a letter. He didn't know where I was. And as I said later, I was an alumnus. I had sent my dues to the alumni office, but sometimes people are so secretive. They don't want to know what other people know what they're doing. And the letter took about 4 weeks to get to me. It went to several places and finally got to my brother who was working at Kentucky State. And he sent the letter to me at Iowa State. So walked in one day after work, got the letter. So I called Dr. Rainey right away. And he said, the letter said, are you interested? I said, yes, I'm interested. At the time I hadn't decided to go, but I was interested. So they took me on an interview. Funny thing about that interview, I took a short hop from Pullman to Spokane. Then it occurred to me that I didn't pack a tie. In the meantime, another fellow that I knew in poultry was getting off the plane. I said, can you lend me this tie? I don't have a tie. So he did. So proceeded on to Chicago in a, who made that plane? Strato Cruiser or something like that. And stopped in Minneapolis, then it stopped in Chicago. And then I was changed planes to Eastern Airlines. Eastern Airlines had a plane that held about 8 people. They were still clod hopping. And, but no, I must have changed to Eastern Airlines in Minneapolis because I got to Chicago. He says, we're going to be here for so many minutes. You can have time to go eat, ta-ta-ta. I ate, got back out, the plane was gone. The plane went all the way to Miami. That's where my luggage went, and I had to call up the people and say I can't make my interview on time. And I'd forgotten. I guess I got on another plane later with my ticket, and they had to postpone. The interview would have been Friday. They had to postpone it to Monday, so I had a good weekend in Nashville. But they hired me. And I was there 5 years. And I think I've gotten you mixed up a little bit here, but that's before the Iowa State thing. I went from Iowa State, I'm sorry, I went from Iowa State as dean at Florida A&M. I got confused there, so cut that out. As dean at Florida A&M, the biggest thing that happened to me there was with the University of Florida. In the meantime, the 1890 schools were in a dither because they were about to get the big money from the federal government. It seemed that a fellow named Dr. Morrison, who was president at Alabama A&M, in a meeting, they usually had a meeting every year with the secretary of Ag, and he said to Secretary Freeman under President Johnson, he said something about getting funds for the 1890 schools. He's told me this story several times. And Freeman said, you're not going to get your hands on that Hatch-Act money. And Dr. Morrison replied, we don't want their money. We want our money. And I don't think that Freeman had really thought of it in that way. So he was able to finagle about $300,000. That was summer '66, out of the total program to spread among the 1890 schools for research. Well, that wasn't much. It came out to around 19,000 for each school. But they did it on formula, so same formula that the 1862 schools were using. And so some got less, some got more, whatever. For instance, North Carolina, which had the most generous formula in my mind, they got more, say, the Florida A&M. Florida had one of the worst formulas, in my opinion. Well, in fact, I have a book at home that shows all of that, but I don't remember. Well, I worked at Florida A&M for 5 years again, and my son said, Dad, every time 5 years is up, you leave. So I did. And the main reason I left, there were several reasons, but the main reason I left was that the University of Florida, people thought they were my boss, and nobody told me they were my boss. And I'm the kind of guy that I'll say what's on my mind. And so I went to work with USDA. In fact, they wanted me on permanently. I worked there a couple of years on a semi-permanent basis in the sense that they would, Florida A&M was paying my salary and they would reimburse Florida A&M. So I was really working for Florida A&M on loan to the CSRS. You remember CSRS? CSRS is the Cooperative State Research Service. They changed the name a little bit, but it's the granting agency for agriculture, and had been there for years. And they had started it. It started for us. The position for the 1890s started in around 71, 72. I took it over from 74 to 76. And they had a panel of people to read the proposals. And there was a proposal from North Carolina, A&T, from their research guy. And it was on nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen fixation at that time would have been a plum research project for anybody. He had a white faculty member who wrote it, and I hope I'm not taking too much time here. And the people that reviewed it said it was a good proposal, but they said it ought to be done in places like Purdue or somewhere. They said, they implied at least that North Carolina A&T couldn't do it. I said, they can do it. They're already getting some resources. It was a $400,000 grant, which would have been equivalent to about a 1.5 million grant, now maybe 2 million. Well, what happened when they would meet with the administrators would meet every so often, every state had to have a memo of understanding between the black land grant and the white land grant. And in the case of North Carolina, they would meet once a year. And I was told that they would jump on that research and be as critical as they could. And after about 4 years of that, the research investigator left. Now, so what that tells me, and my experience in Florida, is that the big ag schools were used to not having competition and didn't want competition at any level. I finished my career up at Florida A&M.
That's where you went this game. What were you?
Okay, when I left USDA, I went to Nevada because I wanted to be in an academic environment. Not that they weren't academic, but anyway, I worked there for 12 years. And then I took early retirement. I was 55, and I went back to Florida A&M, worked another 6 years, and fully retired. I fully retired in '94.
Okay. And then you came back to Kentucky?
No. We live out in Nevada.
You live in Nevada now?
Yeah, right.
How'd they get a hold of you to come here today?
I don't know how they got hold of me to come here.
I don't know either. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I don't know.
Well, that's very nice.
Yeah,
That's very good.
Right.
Now, who was your high school ag teacher?
Mr. Augustus Mack.
I know that name too.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
sir. Did he have much impact on you?
I think so. He was kind of a guy that operated by osmosis, if I may say. He never said directly, I want you to do this, I want you to do that. He sort of kind of weaved a web or something. But yes, he had influence on me.
Yeah, I remember the name very well.
Yeah, right.
Very well.
He had a son who was in my class, in my high school class, Augustus Mack Jr.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. That's pretty neat, you coming here today.
Well, it's my hometown, too.
Yeah, I know, but still pretty neat.
Yeah, I grew up in Caden. Ever heard of Caden Town?
Yeah, sure, I know right where it is.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Caden
You've
Town.
seen a lot of changes in your life.
Oh, yes. Oh, of course.
And-
When I graduated from Washington State, even though the Supreme Court had talked, things hadn't changed very much. Though you could, what shall I say, you couldn't see any real cracks in the system until about '63. That's at least from my experience,
I got
when
you.
things really began to open up. I say to people, when I graduated, when I finished my doctorate in '59, things were just about like the times when my dad finished college in '26. And, but I got lucky too. And I've had a good career. I have no regrets. That doesn't say that I didn't have problems.
Sure.
Everybody does.
Sure.
But I had a good career.
You know, you've seen tremendous amount of changes in
Yeah.
and even though I guess race relations still have a ways to go, you've
Yeah.
seen lots of progress too.
Yes, that's right. And you'd be amiss to imply that there was no progress.
Yeah.
You'd be amiss to
Yeah.
say that, yeah.
How long are you gonna stay in Lexington?
I'll be here this Saturday.
Okay. You got some family still here?
Yeah, I got 2 brothers and
Okay.
their wives. Yeah.
How old
My-
are you, if you don't mind me asking you?
I'm 82.
All right. I hope I have as good a memory when I'm 82 as you have today.
Well, thank you.
It's pretty incredible. Your vine must be about as good as it ever was.
Not quite.
Well, we certainly do thank you very much. And